Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Ann Olnick Gumowitz, the Engelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Menard and Norton Garfinkel, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.
I'm Alexander Heffner, your host on The Open Mind. Fascinated, enthralled, and amazed. These were just three of the emotions running through my bones when binge-watching Jill Soloway's groundbreaking Amazon Prime series, Transparent, and days and months later reflecting on her momentous Golden Globe-winning work. The show stars Jeffrey Tambor as a 70-year-old father who comes out to his 3 adult children as a transgender woman, and transitions gender assignment from male to female, from Mort to Mora, over 10 episodes. Such precision about language, politics, and etiquette is ever present in the cultural milieu that Soloway entered when creating the show, the New York Times wrote about our guest series. Soloway told NPR, "I think of my work as this kind of holy trinity, funny, dirty, sad. It's really easy to be funny. You get a lot of funny people in a room. The show is funny. It's really easy to do sad. You just put some sad music on and write dramatically, and everybody can do that. It's really hard to get dirty." Right. Now she's developing a female MTV comedy about 2 women who were hit by lightning after meeting at a camp 10 years earlier and who bond over enthusiasm for feminism. And I want to thank Jill so much for being on The Open Mind today.
Great to be here.
What is contemporary feminism according to Jill Soloway?
I feel like feminism has been at a bit of a dead end for the past, 5 or 10 years, where feminists have been fighting about things like whether or not Emma Watson is a feminist, whether or not Beyonce is a feminist. There were the sort of second and third wave feminists, and I guess the first wave feminists, who the sex positive thing ended up, I think, causing some real trouble for feminism. When I came up in women's studies, it was all anti-porn. And then the sort of sex positive feminists came to the forefront. And the question, I think, of these huge questions about porn, about consent, about beauty standards, about gender presentation, about gender. Trans women and lesbians sort of are in or have been in a bit of a standstill. So I think that feminism is just about to break open into a place where there can be a lot of inclusivity and a lot of conversation and hopefully a lot of excitement. And things seem like they're changing right now.
And for our viewers on PBS who have not yet downloaded and streamed Transparent on Amazon Prime, tell us a bit about the history here. It's personal, it's intimate.
Well, I've been a TV writer for, maybe 10 or 15 years, if not more, and was kind of always trying to figure out what that show was going to be for me, what was going to be the moment where I created something that was going to break through. I always felt I would go into meetings and pitch ideas and say to TV executives, I want to write something that nobody's ever written before. I want to create television that's going to change the world. And I didn't really know, what I was talking about when I said that. I didn't have anything in mind. I just sort of was speaking that way generally. And then in my own life, my parent came out as transgender maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And when they did, and I realized that there was a whole huge part of my legacy that I was only beginning to understand, I also realized that that this was going to become my cultural contribution.
What has been the most surprising takeaway, Jill, about the reception?
Yeah, well, I think it was surprising for us, and it was also probably surprising for Amazon, because I watched as Amazon went like, oh, let's dedicate more attention, more money to the marketing and the publicity of the show, because people in a wide range of, there's a wide range of audiences who are responding. So yeah, I think for us, we did think there would be like those feminists who were like, this is my show, or maybe Jewish people, or maybe queer people, or maybe people with trans people in their lives, or gay people in their lives would say, this is my show. The show has really caught on as just a sort of a very lovable family show for a really wide audience, and that's been incredibly exciting.
When you were accepting your award, you were perfectly, no pun intended, transparent in your endorsement of these values that are shifting, as you describe, a whole generation towards not only a greater sympathy and consciousness, but a real respect for a community that's struggled. You're completely emphatic in that position. And I think back to Jodie Foster's comments only a year or a few years earlier, which were kind of cryptic. And not as long as a half decade later, you're on the stage embodying advocacy for a long maligned group in this country. Tell me about that moment, because it really so viscerally hit people.
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, you know what? I think when we started writing the show and started creating the show, the actors, the writers, me personally, we were really thinking about it as art and thinking about it as comedy and drama and trying to get the, story right and shoot great scenes. And I was learning how to direct and learning how to really create my own show. And it was really about creativity. And of course, the process is always going to be primarily about creativity. But as we started to put the show out into the world, we recognized how important the show was to the civil rights movement of the trans community right now. That the trans community is really at the beginning of a civil rights movement, and it's huge, the number of, laws that still have not been changed. It's perfectly legal to discriminate against trans people in a majority of the states. You can say to somebody, no, you can't have this apartment because you're trans. No, you're actually getting fired because you're trans. Oh, you can't use either restroom actually because you're trans. That's legal in most states. So we are just like it. If the civil rights movement has, is at 100, we've probably only gone 1% so far. First, we need to get the basic human rights in order. And so, yeah, in preparing for the possibility that I might win at the Golden Globes, that the show might win, I definitely sort of took off the table the notion that I would approach the stage and go, oh my God, okay, what am I going to say? I knew that
you freed us from that too.
Well, that's a luxury, I think, and I recognize that if we had a moment where we were going to have the ears and eyes of potentially the entire globe, with an international audience, that I wanted to use those 30 seconds. So they were very clear, 30 seconds. Right. I wanted to make sure that I used those 30 seconds to potentially affect the movement and to help as many trans people be humanized in as many places in the world. So yeah, I worked hard to make sure that if we won, I would be able to speak clearly and speak open-heartedly about love and about compassion and connection with the trans community.
Well, moving. Jill, does that make you an artistic activist or an activist artist? How do you think of yourself?
Yeah, I think of myself as an artist, and I think artists are activists. A lot of times when things change in the world of politics, they happen culturally first. They happen with the artists first. Arts and culture can change people, and then the people can make demands for the government, make political demands based on how they've transformed. So I think it was really cool to hear Obama say the word transgender for the first time in his speech a few weeks ago, and I had people Facebooking me and saying, "This is because of your show," But I think that when you get to know trans folk. And, let's say, Ian Harvey, the character who plays Allie's boyfriend, Dale, in episode 7, and he's a trans man. And, you watch, besides more, all the other trans people, something as simple as caring for a person like that and saying, listen, if they go to the mall, they have to run home to go to the bathroom. They're not safe anywhere. It's really just an odd thing that our country still hasn't quite figured out how to do. So,
So are we embarking on the end of a stigma, Jill?
yeah, it's going to take some time. I mean, I'm learning so much about gender and gendered language and gendered spaces, and you know, there's a lot of use for gendered spaces. People use the idea of gender to break down the feeling of chaos in the world. You know, I notice gender all the time now. So I'll be waiting to get on an elevator and notice that, you know, somebody, ladies first. You know, it's like the chaos of 10 people standing in front of an elevator and figure out, you know, how do we get on? Well, one thing that people do is they let ladies go first. And what's a lady? Is that somebody who's, you know, born female, who's dressed beautifully? Is it somebody who's female assigned at birth? Somebody who is presenting female or presenting femme? Is it, you know, it's so odd when you start to notice the ways that gender offers people tools for reducing chaos. But the fact that people gender other people and need to gender other people seems odder and odder and odder to me everywhere I go. You know, I notice that waiters really like to gender people. Sometimes I'll be at a restaurant with friends of mine who are genderqueer, who don't necessarily, who may be, you know, female, but who may look really butch and get really offended when waiters come to the table and go, ladies, you know, has anybody brought you a menu? Ladies, would you like? And they're like, even though they're female, they hate being called ladies. Yeah, I'm not necessarily trying to create a gender revolution, but I am excited to be part of something that causes people to question their assumptions about gender.
Like you said, it was a family story. How is that going to evolve further in what you're currently working on with season 2?
Yeah, well, we're just starting to get into it. We're just trying to figure out what exactly the family wants for season 2. You know, they all sort of connect to each other and they all trigger each other. In season 1, we found ourselves talking about this thing we called the Ring of Light. It's this idea that Maura and Shelley and Sarah and Josh and Allie were all connected to this ring of light that they didn't really understand, but it was their legacy, it was their family, it was their connection, it was their pfefferminness, it was the fact that they all grew up in the same home, but they didn't really know what else. They didn't know how to take care of each other. They didn't know how to really be honest with each other. So in season 2, they're really kind of learning. In season 1, we asked a question that we'd like to call, would you still love me if... ... And in season 2, we're asking the question, would you still love me if I'm happy? So all of the characters are going to be taking a step towards their own personal happiness and having to deal with the fallout of how that affects the rest of the people in their family.
One of the motifs seems to be nature versus nurture in some sense. One of the questions in our kind of conversations about homosexuality, for example, are you born gay? And your answer is complex because it shows that the circumstances under which someone comes out as an environmental factor can very much influence norms within a household.
I think, in particular, when you talk about, you know, whether or not somebody is born gay or what their nature is, when you think about Sarah, who didn't identify as a lesbian, but who identified as a straight woman, but who experimented with her sexuality in college. So, you know, there's the moment before Maura comes out where Sarah is having this sort of dalliance with her ex, Tammy. And then as soon as Maura comes out, Sarah really conflates and confuses Maura's coming out with her own. Sarah then decides very, very quickly, oh, you know, my parent is trans and I am a lesbian. She sort of grafts her parents' queer identity onto her own life as a way to, I don't know, maybe not experience the feelings of integrating her parents' transness, or possibly to finally grab onto something that she suspected could be her legacy, but that she maybe didn't really want to face. Maybe it allows her to face herself. But yeah, that's very common when people come out in families. Everybody starts to come out. It's not necessarily even people who come out as trans. People can come out as anything, or even go into recovery. Some people, you know, go back in rather than come out. They say, I'm not going to drink anymore, or I'm not going to gamble anymore. And a family is a system. And so when one person makes a big change, it automatically sets off this domino effect on everybody else in the family.
So it's nature, but nurture contributes.
I think the best hope would be a sort of toppling of the global patriarchs. It's probably more important for there to be some sort of, gender reparations first for the next 100 years before.
Explain that.
Well, there are so many women who don't have any access to a lot of the things that men have access to. So that's the first thing, is that there's an imbalance between the masculine and the feminine in our society. So transness is one thing, and trans misogyny is something else entirely. There's a book called Whipping Girl by Julia Serrano who really explains how trans misogyny and misogyny are connected. When women transition and become male, they actually don't have a ton of trouble because they're going and grabbing that male privilege, and that access to male privilege kind of gets them applauded by society. Like, oh, look, now you're a man. We're happy for you. However, when men transition and become women, they really, really have a hard time. Trans women are victims of violence at a rate, of 10 times the regular population, or the cis population. Trans women of color are murdered, and many have already been murdered this year. There is something about the trans feminine population that really raises the ire of people and makes them the victim of violence, much more so than just their transness. So that's huge. That's a really big deal in terms of, what this has to do with feminism and what this has to do with the feminine being respected in our culture. I look at things like, so to me, when I read Whipping Girl and I see how much more trouble trans women have than trans men, how much hatred there is towards trans women, Julia Serrano says this idea that's so interesting to me, which is people really give trans women a hard time through bullying, through violence, because there's this underlying expectation that anybody who would choose to be a woman must be crazy. And so people look at trans women with that sort of subconscious judgment. And that's really a hatred of the feminine. That's an ingrained misogyny. So to me, when I look at what the feminist movement is asking for, particularly around conserving women's right to their own bodies, as well as keeping the earth safe from violence, these are women's relationship with their bodies and the way that we're policed by the government, the way that the earth is policed by war. These are all about this planet being out of balance towards the masculine. So first, when I talk about the gender reparations, first we need like 100,000 years of the feminine being in power, and some sort of matriarchy coming into position to try and do something about all the murder all over the planet, and then after that, a gender-neutral world.
Well, that's a healthy blueprint, aspirational certainly. As we inch closer towards that, reparations being maybe a little unrealistic, right? No?
I can dream.
You can dream. No, well,
female directors, female writers,
no, of course.
Women politicians.
Is that though enough of a reparation? Would a reparation be in effect the United States Senate not being dominated by old white men? I
mean, you look at something like President's Day, and I recognize what it looked like for me to be a little girl looking around at the pictures of all these white men as presidents, and all the little girls who are told, just by looking at who the presidents are, that that you can't lead this country.
You think still though?
Well, so we've had one African American president, and so we might have Hillary, but
I mean in terms of who's in the classroom and what that curriculum is dictating. And if they're going to assign transparent, I hope it might not be.
Yeah, that's great that things are changing. Shonda Rhimes spoke at the Writers Guild Awards and said that I think Scandal was the first time in 35 years that an African American woman was the lead in a television show. I think the last one was Julia, about a housekeeper. There's still so much work to be done for women and people of color, queer people, and people who are otherized every single day to keep white men feeling comfortable with their privilege. The giving up of privilege is really hard. And, white cis males, and cis is the opposite of trans, white cis males have had power for hundreds of years, thousands of years. They're not giving it up easily. And all of the people who are otherized so that white people can have power, or white cis males can have power, women, people of color, queer people, trans people, are slowly but surely asking for the privilege of protagonism, whether that means as a character on a television show, as a writer, as a director, running a company, running a country, running a state. This is just starting. We're nowhere near finished. We're only just beginning, and I hope I get to live to see some of it really change.
Well, I think you are a representative of that change. You feel that way?
I it's weird because I think as a kid, my mom's here with me. I think I grew up in the 70s as part of the civil rights movement. My parents were activists, and I really believed that the world was going to change. I really believed that the peace movement was going to work, and that war was going to stop, and that racism was going to end. And I believed in what Dr. King was doing, and then all of it. We were very excited as children in our neighborhood, believing that revolution was afoot and that the world was going to become a better place. And it was a real disappointment to get into my teenage years and my adult years and see that things were going to get a lot worse before they got better. So it's exciting to see that things might be getting better soon.
Mm-hmm. Is the civil rights movement in your mind a model? Because you talk about a trajectory here that is similar to the way that folks began to think about reparations and then moving towards practical means of securing those rights. In the political process, often senators will say behind closed doors that, and this has been reported in many a political story, that it was the women, it was the Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe, the presence of, even a small presence of women in some of our deliberative bodies who created a platform where policy would actually become enacted, because there wouldn't be this divisive climate.
Well, a lot of people talk about the difference between the masculine and the feminine style of leadership. That the masculine is competition, and the feminine is collaboration. I look at all of these, these monitors everywhere, and all this war and all this real horrificness happening in our culture, and it does seem like if some of the male politicians would just give some women just sort of maybe take a year or two off, just like, okay, we've had our way with the globe, but we let's admit we have no idea what we're doing. We don't know how to get from point A to point B. We thought we did. Let's get some help from our feminine
in
side.
the ideal world, I don't think you're suggesting a patriarchy is replaced by a matriarchy.
Why not? Sure,
yes.
Let's start there.
Okay.
Yes, let's start there.
Well, there's certainly, and I don't know if your cast is
fine.
Well, I think it'd be fine too. But it would be, as to your mind, a fantastic and yet radical departure from the present, and so I don't want to call it a lofty vision, because you have shown real demonstrations of progress, but in the lingo, in the rhetoric, in the kind of nomenclature behind these conversations, how do you suggest to a woman on a college campus who sees the Rolling Stone publish a story alleging a gang rape, a horrible, horrific scenario, and in the click of a button, retraction, which totally disregards what they just said. This woman was gang raped. Oh, no, wait, she wasn't.
I'm glad you asked about this, because people don't talk about consent anywhere near enough. To me, the question is not whether or not anything happened to that woman and whether or not she lied and whether or not journalistically it should have been reported. I mean, the fact that these questions keep coming up, the fact that over and over and over again, this notion that someone who says that they have been raped isn't trusted, this to me is the interesting part. The thing that the gender movement teaches us, and the mind-blowing stuff that has occurred to me over the past few years as I've gotten to know women who don't have vaginas and men who don't have penises, is you begin to question why this question of consent is only placed on women. And as long as you're asking, Alexander, the vagina is thought of as the receptive organ, and thus consent is always in question because the vagina receives. Consent is never in question for the masculine because the penis enters. And so this is the problem, is not that people are either lying or not, but that nobody's talking about the fact that women are, because by their very nature, questioned as to whether or not they're consenting because of their physiology. So nobody asks this question about trans women. Nobody asks this question about men, the article in the New York Times over the weekend about a college student who was 21 who had an affair with an older mentor who was 28, and they had sex for the course of the year, and now she says she was sexually assaulted. She says it was rape. She says she was a sex slave. This question wouldn't happen with a male student and a female professor because of people's physiology. And that, to me, is the unspoken thing that nobody speaks about, that nobody teaches high school students, nobody talks about with college students, which is because of the way women's bodies are built, because of the way men's bodies are built, and because of the way intercourse happens, the question of consent is always upon the woman or the feminine. So I wish people would have these kinds of gendered understandings of consent, so that these symptoms, like this thing you're talking about with Rolling Stone, this is a symptom. The question is not whether somebody's lying. The idea that someone could be lying is the problem. And all of these news stories, all this constant confusion is a symptom of an unhad discussion.
On that note, Jill, I want to thank you for being on The Open Mind. And thanks to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time for a thoughtful excursion into the world of ideas. Until then, keep an open mind. Please visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind to view this program online or to access over 1,500 other Open Mind interviews. And do check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Open Mind TV for updates on future programming.
Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Anne Olnick Gumowitz, the Engelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan Gans CUNY and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Menard and Norton Garfinkel, with special thanks to the Schumann Media Center for additional support, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.